book. I have another book to recommend, but this is kind of his shortest book. He's probably the premier Lutheran apologetic guy. He's a Missouri Synod guy. He knew C.S. Lewis. He does an apologetics seminar every year. The only problem with this book is I don't think it was his best effort, because he just took like all of his stuff that he'd put in a much bigger book and just chopped it down, and it sort of reads like that. It's kind of herky-jerky. Instead of just simplifying and saying less, he just kind of hatcheted some of his other books. So I don't know, if you know his other books, it reads. If you don't know his other books, I feel like you'd easily get lost. This is a new Wells product. This one's kind of interesting, not for the answers that it gives so much, which are good, but what's even better is the whole premise of this book, Quick to Listen, is it does personal interviews with people who are, for example, Bible skeptics, members of the LGBTQ community, evolutionists, atheists, and so you get to hear firsthand, almost like you're talking, and then you get to see like the value of listening. We talked about that last week, and that's a rule of apologetics. And then with listening, how do you respond to the specific person? This is another Lutheran author, Alan Quist. It's good. It's good. I liked it. This is actually another. Some reason I have a lot of Lutheran ones here tonight. But Valerie Locklear, she tries to write for the middle school student. I thought it was an average book. Kind of goes off on a lot of tangents, but maybe something if you're a middle schooler. This one is a very worthwhile one to have for sure. For kind of just, it's like a good reference book to have on the shelf. You got a question about apologetics, or someone hits you with a question about apologetics, it's probably in here. And then a little answer to it. And that's kind of how a lot of it is done. It's sort of like raises the question, then answers it for you. I'm just trying to find objections to miracles. Miracles violate the principle of the uniformity of nature, like as if you need to know that right now. But it takes that objection and then it gives you an answer to it. So kind of a neat book to have. This guy, this is the book for you right here. This guy here is a cold case Christianity. A lot of these apologetic guys have a background story where they started in some kind of atheism or close to. Warner Wallace is a cold case detective, and he for whatever reason started studying the things of Christianity like a cold case detective would do. It's kind of sort of this whole thing. In a sense, you could say this guy died, and then the claim was that he rose again. This almost, you could say it's kind of like a cold case, a case that happened years and years ago, and he investigated it from using the same principles that he uses for solving old crimes. He's famous. He's been on all kinds of TV shows for just regular cold case stuff. He became a Christian. He's kind of cool because he approaches it that way, which I think, like some people get really excited. Like this guy probably usually like, well, I get all that, but he's got videos, participant. He has a kids version too, which I worked through with my kids and I thought was kind of fun. Lee Strobel's another guy along those lines. Lee Strobel is a guy from Chicago, worked for the Tribune. He was a reporter and a columnist, really. And then his wife became Christian, and then she nagged him about it. He wanted nothing to do with it. And finally, to get her to, Lee Strobel, yeah, okay, that's a different book, Inside the Mind. But he has a whole series called The Case for Christ, The Case for Faith, The Case for Miracles, The Case for Creation. And I have all those books on here, and those are a pretty good pickup. And like I even have this edition here. I mean, you can't of course see it. It's called the Student Collection. Very reader friendly. His whole thing was like, if he's cold case guy, this guy's reporter guy who is not going to let any news nugget or rumor or whatever go unturned and unmined completely. So he investigated everything and interviewed everybody. and finally, writes his book, went from atheism to Christianity when he was trying to prove Christianity wrong. A lot of neat stories of atheists. C.S. Lewis was an atheist or agnostic at the very least, became a Christian, and so they end up being some of the best writers. Ravi Zacharias, a guy from India, says a lot of interesting things, a little bit tougher to read with an Eastern mindset. One of the premier guys, though, is a William Lane Craig, and one of his tougher books is Reasonable Faith. You open that up, and you got to be almost a scientist. But I just started reading another book that he called is On Guard. I haven't finished reading it, but that is wonderfully written at just anybody's level. And that would be another one, even though I haven't even gotten past the first 2 chapters, I would recommend to anybody. On Guard, it's called. And he goes a little guy doing that.
What's the guy's name again?
William Lane Craig. He is, of the living apologetic guys, him and Ravi Zacharias would be the 2 most well-known and popular. He's gone all over the world, debated everybody on these sorts of things. I would recommend On Guard. I would recommend Strobel's Case for Christ or Case for Faith books. I would recommend David Wallace, Tim Keller, this book here. This one would be good to have on the shelf, I don't plan on sitting on your couch and reading it. You probably would, snooze you, but at least it's almost like a encyclopedia a little bit, you pull it out when you got a question, and then you put it back because it's done its job. It answered your question. I was checking. I have a couple others on here, but I think I've covered. Oh, another one that's a Lutheran guy, Religion on Trial by Craig Parton. He was actually Wells for a while. He's Missouri Synod now, but Religion on Trial by Craig Parton. I haven't read it in a while. It seemed pretty good. This Montgomery guy, he's a favorite of mine. And I said I don't recommend this book, but you could look up any number of his other ones. He seems sort of repetitive, but he's just got kind of an engaging style. I enjoy listening to him and reading some stuff.
How are these books compare?
Those would also be apologetic books, but they're going to be more. They're good. They're not going to get into the nitty-gritty of apologetics as much, but he is a professor up at Martin Luther College, and he does a very good job. In fact, the first story in Prepared to Answer has just a really cool. He's sitting on the porch here with this girl. Yeah, I don't think I even need to. It doesn't matter if I find it in here. It must be this on page 7. But if you look at this, what evidence is there that God exists? He answers just some different questions. It would be a pretty good one in its own way. It's maybe a little bit more devotional than it is, say, technical or something like that. But that's definitely a good one. And he would have a really good answer for a scenario like this. He tells a story. He worked in, I think it was in Madison for a while. And he tells a story of a girl sitting on the stoop and saying something about how she doesn't believe in God. And his response to her was, "Can you tell me a little bit about this God that you don't believe in?" Now, we talked about this a little bit last week, but why do you think that was a very helpful, engaging response to the "I don't believe in God" sort of statement? Any thoughts? She said, "I don't believe in God." He says back, "Tell me a little bit about this God that you don't believe in."
It's a perfect answer because it forces the respondent there to identify God and get right to the point. If she doesn't believe in God, and being in Madison, that wouldn't surprise me. I was in grad school there. I think most people don't believe in God in Madison. It forces the person that's answering to immediately identify in open terms, not a yes or no question, but in an open format, what the problem with God is. And if you can get them to do that, then you've already won.
Mm-hmm. I think so. In fact, after this girl gets done, you have to read it for yourself. It's been like 10 years since I read this story. I remember his comment though at the end is, I don't believe in that sort of God either. After she got done describing God, here's a Christian pastor saying, I don't believe in that sort of God either, because the God she said I don't believe in really sounds nothing at all like the God of the Bible at the end of the day. And the way he discovered that was, as you were saying, by listening to what she said, and that's a great apologetic technique. The first week we met, we just talked about what is apologetics, and for the sake of time, just apologetics is that it's a subset of evangelism that gives and strives to give a reasonable answer, a logical answer to a person, a skeptic, whoever it might be. Sometimes it's just inquisitive, sometimes it's even malicious when, say, problems arise. And by problems I mean logical problems, not like like a theological question like please explain to me who Jesus, that's not a good one. Please explain to me what is Holy Communion. But it's a problem like how do you even know there is a God? Or how can you say there is a loving and all-powerful God when evil exists in this world? Or how can we say that what we heard from these disciples through these books, which were written 2,000 years ago, are reliable? Or that since we don't have the originals, how do we know that the manuscripts that we have today are accurate? So those kinds of problems, more logical or mathematical problems, even things like the Trinity, that doesn't make any sense. 1 + 1 + 1 doesn't add up to 1. It's more like that logical or mathematical problems. And I would say this too, they're problems that seem either, whether inquisitively or maliciously, seem to really close the door on telling somebody about Jesus Christ. Especially if someone says to you, I don't believe in God. Oh, well, shoot, now I can't tell you about Jesus because Jesus is God. You don't believe in God. The conversation's over. And so this week we want to deal with that basic one. We're going to deal next week with the issue of the person of Jesus and the resurrection, which is probably the centerpiece of, because you can see what the problem is there, right? Simple problem with the resurrection of Jesus is drive up and down the road and you will find that dead people don't rise. So a claim that a dead person rises is pretty ridiculous when you think about it. But how do we handle that? The ridiculousness of that Christian claim. Then we'll also look at the problem of evil and hell and a couple others over the course of the next few weeks. But we started this issue of God last week, and I wanted to kind of bring it back to there as well. It's apologetics sometimes deals directly with the Bible, sometimes stands on the edges of the Bible, and it deals with logical reason, uses the reason that God gives us to put a stone in a person's shoe, to get them to think that my strong stance against the existence of God, for example, is not the only reasonable logical conclusion, that there's other reasonable logical conclusions you can draw if you consider all of the data. But Bible, God apologetics is in the Bible, and we'll look at some of these tonight. Psalm 19 verse 1 says, the heavens declare the glory of God, the skies proclaim the wonders of His name. In other words, the Bible is just saying, you can look at, you remember this catechism? Called that the natural knowledge of God. You can just look at nature. And we're going to do that tonight with what's called the design argument. Hebrews 3 verse 4, Romans 2, we're going to come to those very quick, but this gets into the cosmological argument of God. This is going to get into the moral argument. And in looking at these, I think they're going to also just, I hope, spur on some other thoughts about the fullness of the Christian faith and how to get into a good evangelism conversation, and certainly how to get back into one if you feel like someone's put a bump in the road. I don't even believe in God. So here we got the cosmological argument. What do I mean by that? You're going for a walk out in the woods with a friend. If I told this story last week, I apologize. Sometimes I forget what I all say. So you're going for a walk out in the woods, all right? And you're way out there, way off the the beaten path, this and that. And as you're walking out in the woods, come across a house. And I purposely picked this house because that would be even crazier, right? Because it's so modern. It's not like some rundown shack that you're just like, well, you know, built years ago, not much question. But you come up to this house, way out there, and you and your buddy are just like, all kinds of questions come to mind. Like, who built this house? And why would somebody build this house? And maybe you really get into architecture. Oh, you know, like how many rooms is this house? I wonder if it's on the grid or off the grid. Is it solar power? You know, does it have indoor plumbing, or is it, you know, all kinds of whatever you might want to know about this house? You got all kinds of questions. But the one question that you would never dare to ask your buddy, because your buddy would likely just like laugh at you, you know, knock you out, blindfold you, and leave you lost in the woods for being so foolish, is, did someone build this house? Well, that's just would be about the dumbest question you could possibly ask, right? Because all of logic, all of experience, says that if there is a house here, somebody had to build it. That's what Hebrews 3 verse 4 says. Every house is built by someone, and God is the builder of everything. This is, in its own way, what we call the cosmological argument for God. Last week I gave the picture of a baby, and I talked about that with what's called the contingency argument. This cosmological one, for the fancy name that it has, really just means beginnings, right? The cosmos, beginnings of everything, is all it really goes back to. And I used that picture of the baby. Again, if you see a newborn baby, you're going to have all kinds of questions or comments about the baby's eyes and ears and how big was it when he was born and how long and you know, whatever. If you don't see him as boy or is it a girl, you can have all kinds of questions about that. But one question you would never ask is, you know, does this baby have parents? Because we know, or maybe even more to the point, was this baby born? Or something like that. Because we know that whatever begins to exist has a cause of its beginning. We know these things from experience. I don't even think that if you would make this, there's just three simple parts to this argument. If you would make this argument to an atheist, I don't think any atheist or skeptic would ever bat an eye at this. Because if it's not true that everything that begins to exist has a cause of its beginning, something just exists, right, without a cause, what would we call it? It's an M word. Miracle. What would we call that in magic? That would be the other simpler term, maybe. Miracle. Yeah, which is kind of funny. You use the word miracle, but I started to try to do this last week, but maybe even a little bit more this week, is you just start to realize a lot of times we feel like we're on the defensive. Like atheism or the world is accusing us of all kinds of fairy tales and fancy ideas and whatever about where stuff comes from and this and that and the other thing and people rising from the dead. But honestly, if you think it through, atheism or what's called naturalism, no God in the picture, everything just has natural explanations, ends up having a lot more crazy magic ideas and other strange things in order for their theories to have any hope of survival. But the first thing that you can argue is, you just have to remember the idea of a house in the woods. Everything that has a beginning, whatever begins to exist, has a cause of its beginning. Pretty reasonable, right? The second one is the universe began to exist. Reasonable? Accepted? Christians, of course, would say, well, duh, Genesis 1 verse 1, right? What would an atheist say? The final argument is this. Therefore, the universe has a cause of its beginning. And maybe what I should do is capitalize the C. Because then all we're going to say is, we're trying to put a stone in a person's shoe. Who or what does that cause? We'll say the cause is God. Now, where might the atheist object to this simple argument?
There might have been a different cause.
There might have been a different cause? I haven't heard that too much, and then you would just have simply ask, such as, right? I'd be interested to what they might possibly say.
And what caused God?
Yeah, and we'll come back to that one. Let's circle back around to that one. Let's take these a little bit in order. But okay, therefore the universe has a cause of its beginning. What caused God? Actually, right built into this, you see the answer to that. It's a misunderstanding of the whole thing. Look at the first premise. That's what these blue things are called, premises. Right? Look at the first premise and tell me how this whole thing answers Ava's objection.
God never began to exist.
Yeah, this says whatever has a beginning. That God, by definition, doesn't have a beginning. Whatever begins to exist, God is eternal. Now they might say, well, then that leads into the second objection. Maybe they'd say, well, maybe God isn't. You don't have a God who's eternal. Maybe the universe is eternal. First of all, I can see three logical problems with that. The first one is, do atheists even believe that? The universe is eternal. What does the atheist believe about the beginning of the universe? 13 billion years old. So not even, you have to be talking to a kind of a pretty, today at least, in modern times, in the last 100 years, you have to be talking to a pretty, at least since Hubble and all that, you have to be talking to a pretty far out there philosophical atheist rather than any kind of day-to-day sort of one.
Not necessarily. More recently, in theoretical physics, we're seeing an increasing number of folks who happen to believe that the universe always existed. You brought this up last week. This is insane, I don't know how they believe this, but the universe has always been there, and that our existence is merely a speck on this eternal plane. And theoretical physics can lead people to that belief through some of its mathematics too. So you've got some big minds that are saying this, and there are big minds from the Christian world that are taking it on too. But
yeah, and okay, and that is definitely possible. So you can have people. We also have answers to that, but the general accepted thought is that there was a beginning, and there's this Big Bang idea. And the question that I think is a fair one to say, well, if there was a Big Bang that started, following this line of thinking, who was the Big Banger? But even if you wanted to kind of jump off into some of these different theories, I think there still is some, and I'm not, the most scientific sort of person, but there's a couple of problems, and one is illustrated, and maybe a guy like you with some more of a scientific background might call me on some of this, but we're going to try this out. One of the biggest differences between Christianity or theism and naturalism is that theism is very comfortable with what we call this is an open system, right? The universe is an open system. I don't know if this is a very good illustration of the universe, but we're going to use that. And by an open system, I mean that things can come in. And namely, those things come in because there's outside of the system, there's God. And God can juice this place up, and we would say in creation He did juice it up, and if God wanted to, He could juice it up again and again, and He intervenes. He does miraculous things. He even came in as the God-man, the incarnate Christ. He came in. It's an open system. Miracles can happen. Energy can come in from the outside. I think it's pretty accepted among scientists, Christian and non-Christian, that you have this singularity of the Big Bang, and then it goes out. That there is an outer edge to this universe, but we would say on the outside of this universe, not necessarily in a geographic way, God, who is uncaused and timeless and spirit and all these sorts of things, can reach in and does reach in to fuse this with energy or has with energy. We have no problem with that. However it happens, He can do that. Yeah.
Let me just say this.
Yeah.
So I'm going to deal with an everyday common guy.
Yeah.
I punch a time clock with him. You think he's going to talk about the origins and that? It's like society right now. Me.
Yeah.
Why should I believe in God? What's in it for me? What do I get out of it? Why am I going to waste my time every Sunday going to church? I pray and I don't get what I want. I mean, you're going, I see where you're coming from, the hardcore, you know, agnostics and stuff like that are gonna go with the universe. How many people are gonna talk about the origins and contemplate the origins of the universe?
Maybe not many.
The common gentleman, lady, whatever, that you're gonna interact with on this information
Yeah.
is gonna deal with life, their life.
Yeah.
I maybe was a Christian in the past, something bad happened, God didn't help me.
Yeah.
Forget God.
And I think that could very well be the case, and the way we find that out is by listening. And what you might find in listening to a person who says that is, you know, in talking to the person, they might come back to a theme like this, like, I don't need God, or who can even say that there is a God? And really what you'd end up doing is saying this and then moving on to Jesus and being done. And I hope God bless you that you do. But with a course like this, all I'm trying to do is, like, you know, dig in and then maybe dig in a little bit deeper. Like, what if somebody says, like, what if you are talking to you know, Joe worker, you know, shop worker sort of guy, and he says, yeah, I get this, but I remember back in my you know, in my evolution class or in my science class in college, I remember hearing that, you know, this Big Bang sort of thing. Or maybe you're talking to him and he just says, well, yeah, but, you know, again, why do I need to make a big deal about God? Maybe this is just all there ever was. The universe is just all there ever was. They might just say it in passing. They might not hold to it all that seriously, but to have a few tricks because what we're trying to do is get the conversation back to Jesus as fast as possible. So hopefully what you have is a guy that you just can talk to about Jesus like that. And get right down to the nitty gritty, like, what's in it for me? What about life? But if they throw a couple curveballs at you, that's what this is trying to do, is just to be able to, if you're a baseball player, foul those off until you can get the pitch right down the middle that you can knock out of the park, right? So I get what you're saying, and that is the goal, just trying to answer these little things. So some of it does get into kind of some silly stuff, but I'm not going to dwell on this whole box thing for very long. We're going to get back to that in just a second. But just to look at this is the idea of, if somebody would object to the idea that maybe God, we don't need God because the universe always was. As Christians, we're very okay with what's called an open system. If you're a naturalist, though, you believe in what's called really a closed system. It's not open, it's not closed. In other words, there is nothing out here, and nothing can come in, and really, I suppose, in a sense, nothing goes out. Which, I mean, what does it matter? What matters is this. If you believe in this, that it's a closed system, there's nobody out here, then your own science starts to work against you. I am no scientist, but there's this thing called the second law of thermodynamics. It says if you have a closed system and you have this energy in here, see, we're fine. God puts the energy in and keeps putting it in as however he wants, sustains, provides for. According to what's called the second law of thermodynamics, the useful energy, slowly over a finite period of time, it's still there, but it loses its usefulness. It just kind of, it's there, but it's no good to anybody. It doesn't energize anything. Well, the key is to understand it's closed and it's a finite time. So for somebody to come along and say, well, maybe the universe, no God, maybe the universe, now this isn't going to stay open for me. There we go. Maybe the universe always existed, you have a logical inconsistency there. Because if the universe is infinite, no beginning, but in a finite period of time, in a closed system, all the energy would run out, we wouldn't be able to have this conversation that we're having today. So, point being is to follow atheism or to follow naturalism to its logical conclusions, you run into all kinds of things that are illogical. It's not Christianity that struggles with illogical things, because it's very easy for us to just say, in difficult situations, God. Where did the beginning come from? God, right? How'd the flood happen? God, right? All these sorts of things. God becomes the explanation, but when you take God out of the picture, all of a sudden you get into inexplicable things. Like, if you want to say the universe was always there, well, then we wouldn't have the energy to be here to have this conversation. If you want to say the universe began to exist,